What is up, guys? It's Robert here from thecashonmind.com, and in today's video we are going to talk about why you are in debt and why so many Americans and Canadians alike are in debt. This video is going to cover some of the key issues for consumers, some of the issues that they face, and some of the statistics that go along with it. But if you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps with growing the channel. There are more millionaires in America than ever before. It seems as if everywhere we look, there are hundreds of people becoming high net worth individuals through real estate, stocks, and most importantly, the internet. Even though there are people making millions of dollars per year, this doesn't mean that the majority of Americans are benefiting. You see, household debt also seems to be skyrocketing in America. Why are so many American households in tremendous amounts of debt, and what can you do to protect you and your family so you can live the financial future that you deserve? Truth is, Americans are spenders. Credit card debt costs crossed the $1 trillion mark in 2019. If you don't know how much a trillion is, let me break it down for you. It is $1,000 billion. And that's just, it's really insane. Credit card debt is also known as revolving debt because it's meant to be paid off every month. But surprisingly, it's only 26% of the problem. In 2008, there was this spike in the amount of credit card debt held by consumers, and this is in part caused by the housing crisis. And if you aren't familiar with the housing crisis, it's essentially when lenders were giving people mortgages when they really shouldn't have, and people maybe not as been trustworthy as they could have been with borrowing credit. So a lot of homes had to foreclose, the economy got slowed down, and the housing market crashed, and the government had to intervene, which is not really good when you're talking about a free market. People couldn't afford their house, and so they ended up putting stuff on credit, and it just led to a bigger problem. The modern day credit card has given consumers far greater buying power than they've ever had before, perhaps too much. The average American is oftentimes uneducated about the way that a credit card works, unless you watch my channel, in which case you'll always smash the subscribe button and you know about finance and you're going to be fine. But a lot of Americans hold on to this debt for too long. They live outside their means, and they end up digging themselves into holes that are difficult to get out of. If you watched any of my previous videos, getting into credit card debt definitely hurts. And the worst type of debt is debt that you can't pay back. So with the housing crisis and the debt on the credit cards, it really puts a damper on what you can do in the future because you're paying off this debt, and it can hurt your credit score and stuff like that. So the goal of using credit is to pay off your debt as soon as possible. The average credit card holder has at least 4 cards with an average debt of $8,398 spread across all the cards. The interest they pay alone is enough to be scary, considering credit card companies bait you by wanting you to make the minimum payments. You see, banks actually make their money through interest on loans. That's how a bank works, and they aim to maximize the revenue that they bring in, which you can't blame them for that. That's what any business would do. But considering a single credit card can have upwards of 18% APR, it can lead to very expensive costs when trying to pay down the interest, sometimes almost insanely hard. And we talked about in my previous video different types of lenders and different types of loans that you can get. And if you're doing any of those, which, by the way, after this video, go ahead and check out that video, you definitely put yourself in a bind where you might not even be able to pay off your credit. And Americans under 35 are on average $67,400 in debt. The height of this debt actually occurs when they are 45 to 54, where the average amount of debt is $134,000 per person, almost $135,000. And some of the major causes of this debt are things like college degrees. A lot of people have mortgages, credit card debt, and debt from injuries if they don't have any the proper medical insurance. And there's also this correlation that I found when I was doing the research for the video, that the more educated you are, the more debt that you tend to have. Higher education oftentimes lead to higher income, and higher incomes lead to higher spending, not to mention how astronomically high college debt is now in 2020 or even 2019 in the past few years. People with degrees often carry around $7,200 in debt, and those who don't graduate college carry about half of that. The same article says that the type of family that you have also affects the likelihood that you are in debt. An article that I read when I was doing the research says about 30% of singles don't save money, and that found that being married and having a family will actually decrease the chances that you stay in debt and the chances that you get in debt. Next, we're going to talk about Dave Ramsey, and it's definitely a name drop for him. I mentioned him in one of my previous videos, but he's oftentimes seen as the king of getting out of debt. He's written many New York Times bestsellers in the personal finance industry, making him a very credible source for eliminating debt. And there's an article on his website where he explains that it can be difficult to get out of debt, but it's not impossible. He says that the first step is to make a budget. It's the key to saving money on interest is to save money in general. That way you can put all that money towards your debt. He actually coined the phrase debt snowball, which he outlines as essentially a debt reduction strategy where you pay off your debt from the smallest to the largest. This helps you get momentum as you get rid of each balance, so you'll end up paying the smallest debt in full, and then the next smallest, and then the next smallest until you're out of debt completely. He also outlines a 4-step plan that can help Americans and Canadians, anybody in debt, get out of debt. Step 1 is to list all your debts in order from the smallest amount to the largest, regardless of the interest rate. You don't even look at the interest rate. You just look at the magic number that you need to pay off. Step 2 is to make the minimum payments on all of them, all of the debts except the smallest one. It's also important to note that 78% of American workers live paycheck to paycheck, and it's actually 3/4 of people in the military live paycheck to paycheck as well. Another interesting fact is that 44% of Americans can't cover a $400 emergency without using credit. Dave Ramsey also goes over what he calls his 7 baby steps, which essentially show people how to save for emergencies, pay off their debt, and build wealth. I'll just go through them quick. Step 1 is to save $1,000 for a starter emergency fund. Step 2 is to pay off all your debt using the debt snowball, and that's going to put you in a safe spot with your finances that will allow you to get out of debt. And 34% of Americans 34% of those people don't have any money set aside, 34% of the 69%. And saving money is crucial. I talk about that all the time. Being able to have some sort of comfortability when something bad happens really makes the difference between a happy life and a sad life. If something, God forbid, something happens and you are injured, and you don't have a job anymore, it's definitely better to have a savings. That way you can use it as a cushion. So Dave Ramsey and most other people want you to save 3 to 6 months of expenses in your emergency fund. That way you won't get into debt. And then step 4 is to begin investing 15% of your income into retirement. And then step 5 and 6 are saving things like college funds, paying off your home early, which are beneficial in their own way. And then paying off your house early allows you to spend less money in interest, which will just make you be able to save more. And then step 7 is going to be giving back to those around you, because you couldn't do it by yourself, or there were definitely people along the way that probably helped you. He wants you to learn how to manage your money, build momentum, and feel empowered. And I know I just talked about Dave Ramsey a lot, but he's a very important figure, and so I thought I would bring him up. But when you look at the true cause of the rising debt for Americans, it's not always their poor financial choices that are keeping them from being in the 1%. Costs of goods and services over the past decade have skyrocketed in the U.S. In the last 3 years alone, the cost of living rose 14% across the board. These jumps in costs have risen by double-digit percentages in some categories, including a 21% increase in the median home price. Students attending colleges have been hit hard too. In an article published by CNBC, the rising cost of attending a 4-year public university has risen 35%. More than half of families borrow money for college, and that is terrible, right? You stay in debt so long sometimes, and it really leaves an impact on what you can do in your future. There are people in their 40s and 50s that are still paying off college debt. An insane $1.6 trillion of the nation's debt is tied into private and government education loans. This rise led to the college debt crisis, which is affecting millions of college students across the country. These learners are faced with a decision that ultimately affects their future: go to college and be under a lifelong debt payment plan, or skip college altogether and potentially inhibit their opportunities for a job. Not only is the cost of education rising, but the wages for jobs that are waiting for them after college have become stagnant, only barely allowing them to live a comfortable life. A general rise in prices is encouraged to keep a good economy in good standing, but only if incomes are increasing each year as well. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the current minimum wage of $7.25 was introduced in 2009 and has remained stagnant since. There are some places that have raised the minimum wage. I know California has, but the federal minimum wage And as the time of writing this video, the minimum wage in Georgia, for instance, is $7.25. This means that as inflation is hitting the pockets of millions of Americans, additional wages have not been able to keep up. This anomaly created people struggling to make ends meet, even when working full-time, unlike what the country has seen in recent years prior, where the wages paid to workers was increasing as costs increased. Each state is affected differently on the total cost that it takes to live comfortably. Participants listed reasons why they aren't able to save a set amount of money each month, and the results that this study did showed that 18% of participants said their cost of living is too high to enable them to save. Another important data from this study shows that 23% said they have a low salary, and a whopping 31% says that they get by living paycheck to paycheck. So many families are struggling to make ends meet, and Americans need to take a rough look in the mirror and see what they can do to benefit themselves, whether it's getting side jobs or eliminating debt. Being more frugal with their money also helps. What's really interesting that I learned was that I found this article that pretty much explains that even though these people from the same study are they're living paycheck to paycheck, $483 every single month is spent on non-essential expenses. And that article came from Charles Schwab, which is a very large financial management company based in the U.S. So if $483 every single month is spent on non-essential expenses, doesn't that mean that the debt crisis is nobody's fault but our own? You see, $483 could be put towards eliminating some of the debt, but it's not. So it's definitely just kind of thought-provoking when I read that. So it definitely lies in us. We can't blame the system or blame colleges or whatever for this as much as we can blame ourselves in our own purchases, if that's true. See, the biggest reason that people don't save their money is that they're oftentimes tied up into consumerism. Companies have created a culture of debt centered around consuming more goods and services that they can afford. We shell out money for purchases to make ourselves feel more comfortable around others doing the same thing. If we overspend on wants, we don't take time to better ourselves financially. But in conclusion, Americans are in what seems to be a debt crisis. The cause of mix of rising costs, stagnant wages, and our desire to live above our means keeps us from reaching our financial goals. It really boils down to making the right financial choices, living humbly while trying to increase our income, and that's going to set us apart and help us become more financially independent in the future, allow us to retire when we would like to retire, and take care of our families. So thank you so much for watching. Make sure to please like this video, comment down below what you thought, or if anything seems surprising to you, and then make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you can always see, you can help us grow and whatnot. And thank you. That's all I've got for you guys today. Please join me in the next video. Thank you so much.